Hey, what's up? Hope everyone's doing all right. So this is week, what are we on? Week 29. So if you read about 14 pages of the Bible every week, and you go through the Bible in about 50 weeks. So we're on week 29, and this week is Isaiah. The reading for this week is Isaiah 10 through 40. And once again, I do the reading, and it's like I said, about 14 pages, and so you split up the Bible in about 50 different sections. About 14 pages per section. You get through the Bible in 50 weeks, which is a little less than a year. So every year you can go through the Bible from cover to cover. And like I said, this week's reading is Isaiah 10 through 40. And then Monday through Friday, I have a different theme or a different idea that is inside that reading that I focus on. And so Isaiah is, I actually like Isaiah a lot. It's, he's probably the major, I think he's the first major prophet, or the first prophet, like the book of prophet that you have in the Bible. And so you go through a lot of it. And, when the prophets are prophesying, a lot of it in Isaiah, it's very difficult to understand exactly what he's talking about. It's hard to know if he's talking about like what's to come with Jerusalem falling. It's hard to know what he's talking about when the coming of the Christ. And then, it might be possible he's also talking about some things that happen at the end of the world. And some of these things might be multiple events where everything they say is reciprocal, so it's going to happen at the end of the world. It's going to happen now, and it's also going to happen, at the turn of the era when Jesus comes. But some of it does seem to be taking place like right at that time. And he talks to Hezekiah, King Hezekiah, and he tells King Hezekiah what God says is going to happen right then. So it's definitely things that are going to happen right then. And but it's not only what's going to happen right then, because he does talk about the coming of the Christ. And that's what I have on Monday. The theme that I went over my mind on Monday was Isaiah talks about coming of the Messiah, Jesus. And so, when I read Isaiah, honestly, the things that are talking about Jesus coming, if the New Testament didn't say that these were things that are talking about Jesus coming, then I wouldn't even know that it's referring to Jesus. But the only reason I know that these verses are referring to Jesus is because the New Testament says that they're referring to him. And so, like I said, Isaiah is very difficult to unravel. And if you have a different version of the Bible, the King James version of the Bible, I think people try to unravel it, but I don't think that it is necessarily accurate. And so you have an inaccurate view of what the King James version of the Bible is saying, and then you really don't know what the Bible is saying. And so you're kind of stuck, and then you don't want to go to the King James version because, people are comfortable with what they know, and so they're comfortable with an old book of the Bible, or a different book of the Bible, the old book they used to use, and so they never can move on to the King James. And so, like I always say, and I think it's true, and maybe one day I won't think it, but I feel like it's a lot better to not understand something than to think you understand it and be wrong about it. Because it's a lot easier to learn something new than it is to unlearn something that you've already you thought you know, and then try to learn something different that's different than what you believed. And when the coming of Jesus, or the telling of the coming of Jesus, the Messiah, that's obviously a huge thing. That's the Savior of the world. It's like the big change of mankind, and I think it's probably a big change in all of creation, or all of creation and all of existence. And it's a big, I can only imagine. It's like big in the affairs of man, but I think in heavenly affairs too, the coming of Christ is a huge thing, because I think it places not only Jesus as like, the Son of God, and pretty much above everything in heaven as well, but it also places man on a new platform, a new responsibilities, and a new way of being. And so you have man at this new power and responsibility and precipice, and it just changes everything so much. And it'd be interesting when we die, when we go to heaven, to see kind of where man's place is and things, and how history is affected in the history of man. And I think that each man is just so important, and I think that a lot of people don't understand how important they are. And I think this world is ruled by, a lot of this world at least, if not all of it, or some of it at least, is ruled by Satan. And so Satan's desire is to go against God, and one way to do that is to make man feel like he's not important, or make man not understand his importance in things. And if man understood his importance in things, and how every thought and every action is just so vital in all of creation, and so looked at, and so thought of and critiqued, and just so powerful, that I think man would act a lot differently. And so I think that this new world order, if that's what you want to call it, maybe it's not what it was initially supposed to be, but this the authority that man has to offer right now just makes it so that man doesn't understand his place. And so I feel like if man understood his place, then he would know. But that's just deception. Deception is just running rampant through our whole entire society, and truth seems to be the way to combat deception. And that's how you can make changes and make things the way they should be, is by having things be truthful. But things aren't the way they should be because it's deception that runs everything. When deception runs everything, then things are not the way they should be. So the battle is between lies and deceit and truth. And it's not so easy, because what exactly is truth? And I think Pontius Pilate, asked that question to Jesus, and Jesus didn't answer. And so maybe it's something for us to try to find ourselves. If you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a day, or if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Maybe this idea is the same way where Pontius asks, "What is truth?" to Jesus, and Jesus doesn't respond. And I think that's something that we are supposed to kind of figure out ourselves, so we can figure out the truth, because it's such a huge, important part of existence, is to figure out what the truth is, because it's like the base of all reality. You don't know what to do if you don't know what the truth is. And so it's just like, it's the base of all reality. And it's interesting, at the end of Ecclesiastes, it says, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. And so this is the Old Testament, but is this the whole duty of man, as it is right now in the New Testament as well? For was this the duty of man before Christ, but now man has a different place in things? And I would imagine the answer is he probably does, because Jesus came, and so it's changed, at least to some degree. But I do think this is a duty of man, but I don't know if it's the whole entire duty of man anymore. And it's interesting to kind of see exactly what is the duty of man and what his responsibility lies, and how that changes, and where our place is. And the only way to know that is to have truth, and so that way you can understand where your place is. Because how can you make sense of something if you don't understand it? And how can you do something if you can't make sense of it? Make sense of the thing that you're supposed to do. Sorry, my cat. She's hearing me talking, so she wants to like get into things. When she hears me talk, sometimes she'll come and want to try to get involved in things. Hi, Jojo. Sorry, I got interrupted by the kitty. It's all right, Trisha. You can sit there. You're fine right there. All right. So the second day I have is on Tuesday. It says, God says He'll destroy many kingdoms, and so it seems to be at that time the whole entire world was falling away from God. It wasn't just Jerusalem. It was like the whole entire world was falling away. All the kingdoms are falling away, and Jerusalem and Israel, or Jerusalem and Samaria, or Israel, whatever you want to split it into, they were having issues too. But all of the world, they talked about Syria and Samaria and the different kingdoms at the time. And I feel like that's kind of where we're at right now. It's like, what is God's country? And everyone always says America is God's country, but I don't know. For England is like God's, the King of England, King James wrote it, and what is God's country? And so it's hard to really know exactly what that is, but it just seems like all the kingdoms are falling apart, and all the kingdoms are falling away from God. And I do see a lot of the same patterns that are portrayed in the Old Testament, especially in Isaiah and the prophets and Jeremiah, that are talked about. And I feel like this is the same kind of vibe that you're having right now in America, at least, where just deception is just running everything. And the prophets, I think, are prophesying falsehoods. And I think that people, are exhibiting a lot of the same behaviors. They're going against God, and they're going against the truth. And everything is a deception here, and everything is a lie, and who knows what's really happening. And I feel like you have a lot of propaganda in the news. I don't think that it's factual. I think that maybe one time it was. I think there's a lot of propaganda in politics. I don't think that what's really happening in politics is actually accurate. I don't think what's happening in day affairs, as far as the hidden lies that people have, or they think that they have, that they're portraying, and what they're really doing, and how they're portraying their life, what it is, and what is really happening is completely false, I feel like. And so God says He'll destroy many kingdoms, and I think that might be happening today, and it might be something that's on the future, the near future. And it says, God says many kingdoms will return to Him, and He will bless and heal them. So God says that Father chastises those that He loves. And I think that comes with kingdoms, and it comes with countries, and it comes with civilizations as well. God chastises the civilizations that he loves, and then when they come out of the chastisement, they're refined as gold, they're made as gold, and they're worth, their weight in gold. And so God can do this, and he can chastise these countries and chastise these civilizations, and they can come out better for it in the end if they turn to him. Turn to him when they understand what they've done is wrong, come to him, confess their sins, and then turn to him, and then he'll make them better than they could ever imagine. At least that's how I feel. And on Thursday, this is one of my favorite verses because I do feel like it's really applicable today, and I feel like it's what I see all around me in the environment that I am. It's we have made lies our refuge, and under falsehoods have we hid ourselves. And I feel like that's what's happening around me right now. I think the people around me, the people that control whatever is happening around me, this facade of reality that's placed in front of me, I feel like they make lies their refuge, and they've hidden themselves behind falsehoods. I feel like that's just kind of what encompasses my existence right now, and it's just all around me. I just feel like that's just kind of the name of the game, the name of what's happening. It's just lies, and they do believe in what they're doing because every man is justified in his own eyes, and the Lord ponders the heart. So it says every man is justified. So they feel justified in what they're doing, and I feel like they feel justified in what they're doing. It's because they have made lies their refuge, and they've hidden themselves behind falsehoods. And then for Friday, I have this is the rebellious people who tell the prophets to prophesy deceits. And so there's lots of different prophets, and there's lots of prophets in the Old Testament, and I think there's lots of prophets around now. What exactly is a prophet? That's kind of a prophet is a prophet. You can say some of the attributes of a prophet, but I don't think you can really say, okay, a prophet is a teacher. It's not just a teacher. A prophet does teaching things, but a prophet is a prophet. Like there's prophets and there's seers, and I think those two might be very similar, just said in different ways to different types of people that understand. And I think these are similes, but I don't think there's too much words that are similes. But I think prophets and seers are probably can be interchanged, and I think they're pretty much the same thing. I don't really know the difference between the two, but there might be a slight difference. And so what I was thinking about today, I was thinking about the Mormon Church, and so the Mormon Church they have the main prophet, and then I guess they have 12 other prophets. And so, but then there's like 3 main prophets around the main prophet, and then there's 12 other prophets that have like a board members or something. So they have like 15 prophets, and they have a way of doing things. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, hey, what's wrong with the Mormon Church? And I feel like all the churches that I've gone to, the main theme about it is that they've placed something besides Christ in the center of where Christ should be. And so for the Mormons, I feel like it's they use Joseph Smith and the prophets in the place of Christ, and for Catholics, they just use the doctrine of men in the place of Christ or the Pope, but what the Pope's orders are. And then for Jehovah's Witnesses, I feel like they have a kind of a hive mind mentality where Christ should be the individual. Relationship with Christ is an individual relationship with Christ. It's a church relationship with the individual, and so the church takes the place of Christ as like that leadership role. And then for most regular churches that you go to are non-traditional, which you would call like a normal church. That's like what you would say a non-traditional. I'd say a non-traditional church. I mean, they're pretty much Catholic Church light, where they have doctrine of men takes the priority, but then also the pastors and the preachers, they take the place of Christ. And they feel like they have their flock and they're the shepherd, but Christ is the shepherd and they're part of the flock. They're not the shepherd, and they're part of the flock, and I feel like they take this place of the shepherd. And so I feel like the reason this is happening, the underlying reason of all this, is because there's deception that runs rampant. Until truth is here and truth is prevalent inside the society, then you're just going to have everything in the society is not going to function the way that it should be, in the way that God wants it to. And so this is just the underlying crux of the issue. And so you would have the Mormon Church and the non-denominational churches and the Catholic Church and all these bodies of which are in essence just branches of the Church of God. They would all be done correctly, I feel like, if there was truth. But since there's no truth here, then they're all done incorrectly. And so what's the individual's responsibility in bringing truth? I mean, that's just for each individual in relationship with God to know what that is. And for me, it's just to seek out the truth wherever I can find it and to speak it whenever it's the opportunity arises. Doesn't mean I feel like I should go and harass people, because I shouldn't sin in order to not sin, and I shouldn't sin and harass people just so that I feel like I'm not sinning because I'm telling the truth and not going into deception. I feel like that's not accurate. So I don't think you should sin in order to do the right thing in your mind. So I don't think you should do the wrong thing in order to do the right thing. I think that you wait for the opportunity to arise for you to do the right thing. And I think that once you're doing that, and if you're seeking out the truth and you're speaking the truth when you have the chance to, I feel like that's kind of your you're doing your due diligent at that point, and you're doing your part in the matter, at least to some degree, at least for me. There's other parts I feel like I need to be doing. Obviously, like, you don't want to sin, but how can you know what sin is unless you're living in truth? Because then you won't even know what a sin really is and how to make it right and how to do it correctly and to not give up to sin. But everyone gives in to sin, but you don't want to give up to it. But you wouldn't, you might not understand that if you're just living in deception. And I think that if you're deceiving others, then you're deceiving yourself. And then I feel like your own ways recompense upon yourself. And so if you deceive others, then it's recompensed on you, and so you are deceived. The deceiving deceiver is himself deceived. And so that's what I have for this week. Isaiah 10 through 40, and it's for me, it's encouraging to read Isaiah. I do feel like I exhibit some of the kind of the characteristics of some of the prophets in the Bible. And I think sometimes that maybe I am a prophet, but I think there's lots of prophets, and you can't really witness about yourself, but I feel like my environment witnesses for me, and I feel like there's nobody around me that's going to tell me what's really happening. So the environment around me, I think God shows me, and I think the things that happen to me witness for me, and so I really do relate to Isaiah, but I don't really. Obviously I don't know, and it's hard to it's hard to see ourselves as the world sees us. I think it's hard to see ourselves as God sees us, and so it's really difficult, but I do like it, and I do think that it's comforting to me because I think a lot of the things that I see in the modern society today are reflected in Isaiah, and it just helps me to battle the difficulties and for me to be honest with myself, with my surroundings that I have, and so not to get swarmed by all the different temptations that are around me, and to remember that the temptations around me are there only to hurt me, and there's no positive outcome to the temptations if I give in to them that's around me. So anyways, that's what I have for this week. I hope everyone's doing all right. God bless, and happy truth seeking.